The Devil's Cookbook. Tapping my card against the clock-in machine and hearing that all too familiar beep confirmed it. I was chained to my desk for the next 8 hours. Endless, monotonous tasks awaited me. Deadlines to meet, coffee to make for the higher-ups during their supposedly crucial meetings, which could easily be summarized in a well-written email, and files to organize. Of course, at some point, a clueless executive would inevitably come storming in, rummage through the filing system in search of something urgent, and leave me to clean up the mess. I hated my job, but it paid the bills and left just enough for me to stay afloat. This was never the life I envisioned. I had dreams of joining the Air Force and becoming a pilot, the first female service member in my family. My uncle, grandfather, and their fathers before them had all served, and I wanted to follow in their footsteps. But my body had other plans. I wore glasses, and deep down I knew my eyesight would only get worse. Still, my younger, more naive self never considered that perfect vision was a non-negotiable requirement for pilots. Just like that, my dream was gone. And I didn't have a backup plan. I simply assumed it would all work out. With no noteworthy qualifications to my name, I applied for every job I could find. Rejections poured in one after another until finally I landed an admin position at a stationery supply company. The pay was nothing special, and the tasks felt trivial, but at least it was steady. I managed to save enough to rent a small studio apartment and keep my beat-up old car running. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was something to get me by while I figured out my next step. And as I watched entitled white men bark orders at us like they owned the place, I kept telling myself that one day I'd do something bigger. I just needed a sign. That sign came in the form of a book. I've always loved reading. For as long as I can remember, books have been my escape. My dad used to joke that my hands would one day fuse to the pages of whatever novel had captured my attention, because I could never put a book down once it drew me in. Even in this age of technology, I refuse to switch to digital reading. Sure, the convenience of storing thousands of books on a single device is tempting, but I'm hopeless with technology, and I constantly forget to charge my phone. Not being able to read because of a dead battery would drive me up the wall. Besides, I adore the look and feel of physical books. My little apartment is filled with shelves packed with stories in all shapes, sizes, and colors. Friday finally arrived, and I watched the clock with growing anticipation, counting down the minutes until I could escape this place, at least for a couple of days, and forget about making another strong black coffee, sweet cheeks, or replying to emails about the latest color scheme for our executive stationery range. Every Friday since I started working here, I treated myself to a visit to Bailey and Banks' bookstore, just a short walk from the office. It had become my little reward for surviving another grueling week in administrative purgatory. Without fail, I was always greeted by the same young man behind the counter. He clearly recognized me by now. Everything about him screamed hipster. His untamed beard in desperate need of trimming, his slicked back hair reminiscent of 1950s greasers, thick-rimmed glasses a la Buddy Holly, and a wardrobe that looked like it had been pulled straight from a donation bin. But hey, I wasn't one to judge. I hadn't bought any new clothes since we got a company bonus back in 2011. In case you're curious, I splurged on a pair of shoes that actually cost more than my entire outfit at the time. As usual, I pushed open the door and the familiar bell chimed overhead. I waved at the greasy hipster who was sipping a mug of murky-looking tea and reading the blurb of a book I probably wouldn't have heard of. Aside from me, the store was pretty quiet. The elderly lady who owned the place was tucked away in the office, busy sorting through stacks of paper. An older man browsed the crime novels, and two nerdy-looking school kids lingered around the YA section. Every time I visited, I made it a point to explore a new genre. This time, it was horror fantasy. I'd already made my way through the classics, Stephen King, Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, so I was on the hunt for something fresh. Nothing really stood out at first. I absent-mindedly trailed my finger along the book spines, debating whether to settle for something familiar, when something caught my eye. A small, worn-looking book wedged between two pristine copies of Stephen King's It. It looked completely out of place among the newer titles. I slid it off the shelf for a closer look. Its cover was bound in what appeared to be red-stained leather, with shiny gold lettering that read, "The Devil's Cookbook." Immediately, I was intrigued. I've always had a soft spot for supernatural horror, and I assumed this would be something along those lines. Strangely, there was no synopsis on the back cover. When I opened it, I found what looked like a recipe book. Typical, I thought. It must be a Halloween-themed novelty item. Still, I had no plans that night, and the idea of diving into something odd and festive felt oddly comforting. I brought it to the counter, paid for it without issue, and headed home. After kicking off my heels and swapping my stiff office clothes for a t-shirt and a pair of shorts, I poured myself a drink and put on some music. I didn't have many friends, so Fridays were usually spent alone, which I didn't mind at all. After a full week surrounded by people in a cramped office, a little solitude was more than welcome. I reached into my bag, pulled out the little red book, and studied it for a moment, letting my fingers trace the embossed gold lettering. What was it about this book that caught my attention? Sure, I enjoyed horror stories and liked to cook, but something about it had pulled me in. I couldn't quite explain why. It was as though the book had chosen me, not the other way around. Before I could dwell on the feeling any longer, I found myself flipping open the cover and turning the first page. This was definitely not your average cookbook. Inside was a strange collection of recipes, concoctions, spells even, that claimed to produce all sorts of dark and disastrous elixirs. It was morbid but fascinating. The ingredient lists were bizarre, filled with herbs and fungi I'd never heard of, and each recipe was designed to cause horrifying effects. Nausea, vomiting, blindness, coma, even death. According to the book, none of the potions would be detectable in the victim's system, and any fatal outcome would appear natural. I couldn't imagine how that would work. I laughed to myself, joking that if I ever needed to use one of these, perhaps the devil really was on my side. Still, despite how captivating the book was, I had no practical use for it. Eventually, I filed it away with the rest of my horror novels and all but forgot it existed. Weeks passed, filled with the same cycle of dull routines and mounting stress. Nothing noteworthy happened until the day the book returned to my mind, thanks to an incident at work that nearly pushed me over the edge. I was typing up the minutes from yet another painfully boring meeting, this one about paper quality, of all things. When I was finally getting ready to finish up, that's when one of the project managers, let's call him Darren, stormed over to my desk, clearly irritated. He had a coffee in one hand and a thick contract file in the other. "Mandy, Mary, whatever your name is," he snapped, "this file is missing the terms and conditions amendments for this quarter." His tone was accusatory, as though it was clearly my mistake, even though I knew I'd added the amendments. "There must be a mistake. I added the amendment print just last week," I said, trying to stay calm. Darren's face grew redder by the second. "Don't backchat me," he snapped. "It's not there now, and it was your job to include it. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. If those amendments aren't in the file by the time I'm back from the bathroom, your job's on the line." Asshole! How dare he talk to me like that? Condescending, arrogant prick. I flipped through the file again. There it was, clear as day. The amendments were right where they should be. But of course, his bloated ego and self-importance had blinded him to it. With a smirk, I slapped a bright sticky note on the front page that read, It was in here all along. Then I slid the file to the corner of my desk and got back to writing an email response to a customer complaint, courtesy of upper management. Darren returned a few minutes later, stomped over, and yanked the file off my desk. His expression shifted when he saw the amendments, now visibly annoyed and clearly embarrassed by his own mistake. I could barely suppress a laugh, biting my lip to hide my amusement. But of course he noticed. "You think it's funny to mess with corporate files?" he barked. "Sir, the amendments were already there. I haven't touched a thing." "I know what I saw. They weren't there." His voice echoed across the office and heads turned toward us. My cheeks flushed with embarrassment as everyone stared. I said nothing more. I let him have his little moment of victory. He might have won this round, but he wouldn't win the war. As I sat back down, my thoughts drifted, uninvited, to the little red book. Surely it couldn't actually work, right? At worst, I figured, he might end up with a stomachache, maybe some diarrhea, nothing fatal. But still, I felt something pulling me. As if guided by an unseen force, I rushed home after work, pulled the book off the shelf, and started flipping through the pages, browsing the selection of poisons it claimed to offer. Eventually, I settled on a recipe called puhdista, which, after a bit of digging, I found out means purge in Finnish. According to the book, it would trigger violent expulsion from the stomach. Either end was fine by me. I read through the ingredients list, and surprisingly, most of it seemed pretty straightforward. A pinch of nutmeg, some distilled water, and lace fly wings. Conveniently, I often found a few of those fluttering around my porch light. But the final ingredient gave me pause. It was a fungus named Venenum horribilis. A quick online translation revealed it meant horrible poison. I tried searching for it online, but nothing came up. The name seemed completely fabricated. No descriptions, no scientific entries, no images. It felt like this mushroom existed only within the book's pages. Still, determined to give it a shot, I decided to try my luck foraging. Behind my apartment complex was a patch of woodland. I'd seen mushrooms growing out there before in the damp, mossy areas. Armed with nothing but the book's small illustration as reference, I knew I had to get this right. I wasn't trying to kill Darren, just make him as uncomfortable as he had made me. I threw on my waterproof jacket and wellies, grabbed the Devil's Cookbook, a flashlight, and headed out. The light was fading, and a cold drizzle had started to fall. Perfect weather for mushroom hunting and for unsettling thoughts. Now, as I mentioned before, I wear glasses. My eyesight isn't great. Combine that with poor lighting, slippery terrain, and a crudely drawn color illustration of some bizarre mushroom. The odds weren't exactly in my favor. I could only hope that color wasn't a key identifier, because that would be useless in the dark. Still, I pushed on, flashlight in hand, making my way toward the edge of the woods. It felt like a ridiculous long shot. I didn't even know if this fungus was native to the area, or real for that matter. I wandered aimlessly, half expecting someone to stumble across me and assume I was some lost lunatic searching for fairy mushrooms. But then I felt something. Call it intuition, call it something else. It was as if something guided me. And then, there it was, a perfect match. The same umbrella-shaped cap, dark-colored mycelia underneath, and sickly oozing spots just like in the book's drawing. With a surge of excitement, I pulled on the latex gloves I brought with me, gently harvested a few samples of the fungi, and dashed back home, heart racing, soaked to the bone, but oddly exhilarated. With all the ingredients finally gathered, it was just a matter of following the instructions. Whoever wrote this recipe clearly thought they were talking to a 5-year-old. Every step was delivered in an annoyingly patronizing tone. Cut the mushroom up finely, like big grains of wheat, but do not squash it. Pinch the nutmeg in between your thumb and forefinger and sprinkle into the pot. Turn up the heat so the flames are as big as they will go. What was this? A children's guide to satanic cooking? Must have missed that class in school. After carefully chopping, boiling, straining, and blending as instructed, I was left with a thick mixture that looked disturbingly like vomit. How in hell was I supposed to get Darren to drink this? Even my old dog Bonnie, who once ate her own faces, would probably turn up her nose at it. I skimmed the final section, which explained how to deliver the potion. Apparently, the concoction was soluble in boiling water, meaning it could be administered via tea or coffee. Lucky for me, Darren was almost never seen without a cup of coffee clutched in his pudgy hand. All I had to do was add a few drops to his morning brew, the one I was already assigned to make, and wait for the expulsions to begin. Monday morning, I arrived at work with the bile-colored elixir stashed in a small water bottle, buried deep inside my handbag. Security only checked our bags on the way out, as if anyone would try to steal a stapler, so I knew I had until the end of the day to dispose of it. The book claimed just 3 drops were enough. The batch had produced around 100 milliliters, and there was no mention of a shelf life. But honestly, could it even spoil? It was mostly fungus anyway. Sitting at my desk, I tried to ignore the guilt gnawing at my insides. I'd reread the recipe several times. Nowhere did it mention death, just violent expulsions from the stomach. It would be fine. Maybe some vomiting, maybe diarrhea, definitely a bit of public humiliation. He'd survive, probably. Right on cue, Darren marched over, slammed his coffee mug onto my tray, and disappeared into his office, barking into his phone as usual. Perfect. I made his coffee like I always did, instant granules, boiling water, sugar, milk, and this time added 3 careful drops of the greenish potion. The strange grassy smell was masked well enough by the sugar and milk, and the color blended in just fine. No, I didn't taste it, in case you're wondering. I'm unhinged, not stupid. I knocked on Darren's office door and slipped inside. He was mid-rant on the phone and barely noticed me placing the mug on his desk. Without a word, I turned and walked out, heart pounding. Now all I had to do was wait for the storm to hit. I was quietly entering data into a spreadsheet for one of the accounts managers when, all of a sudden, Darren burst out of his office, both hands clamped tightly over his mouth. Here we go, I thought. The show's about to begin. He was gasping for air, gagging and retching as he staggered into the open-plan office, trying to say something. But his words were lost in choked breaths. People rushed to his aid, flustered and concerned, but it was no use. I tried to keep a neutral expression, but deep down, watching him suffer filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction. I felt powerful, in control, better than him for once. I braced myself, expecting the violent expulsions described in the book. But what came next was far more than I bargained for. He could barely stay upright, swaying like a drunk and crashing into desks, toppling over shelves, knocking over monitors and stationery in a trail of destruction. His face was flushed crimson, his eyes bulging unnaturally, his voice reduced to a raspy wheeze. Someone handed him a glass of water, but he couldn't even drink it. It sprayed right back out of his mouth like a broken faucet. Then chaos erupted. He shoved people aside wildly, flinging one poor woman into the corner of a filing cabinet. She hit it hard, her head splitting open with a sickening crack. Blood trickled down her face as she collapsed, dazed and disoriented. Darren dropped to all fours and projectile vomited a horrific mixture of blood and coffee. I knew it was blood instantly, thick, dark, and far too red to be anything else. It sprayed across the carpet, walls, and the horrified faces of coworkers who had gotten too close. Whatever had been in his stomach was now violently expelled onto the gray office floor in a bubbling, acidic mess. People backed away in horror as the vile mixture spread, coating furniture, computers, and personal belongings. But my quiet amusement quickly turned into dread. In the middle of the chaos, Darren's expression changed. The panic drained from his face. He stopped gagging, stopped shaking, and became eerily still. His eyes stared blankly ahead, void of emotion, like a corpse still standing. Something inside him had shut off. When someone reached out to help, he shoved them aside without hesitation. Then, without warning, he raised one hand to his throat and ripped through his own skin. I watched in stunned disbelief as his nails dug in deep. His knuckles turned white with strain as he tore through flesh like it was paper, exposing tendons and muscle. Blood gushed from the wound, and thick, acidic fluid spilled from what remained of his throat. He didn't cry out, he didn't flinch. He just kept clawing until he collapsed in a heap on the floor, his body twitching before going still. His blood pooled beneath him. His insides spilled out in a slick, grotesque mess. He was dead, and I had killed him. And the worst part, it felt good. This was it, my sign. The power to eliminate anyone who stood in my way was now at my fingertips. All it took was a little cooking and a little cunning. I could do it. I would do it. Greatness was no longer a dream. It was within reach. I was becoming something far beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Paramedics arrived not long after Darren's horrific end, frantically working to stop the bleeding and resuscitate him. But it was pointless. He was already gone, his eyes dull and lifeless, his blood soaking into the office carpet in a thick, sticky pool of red. Around me, chaos. People were crying, clinging to each other, frozen in disbelief. But not me. I simply sat there watching it all unfold, calmly and proudly. I had done this. I had caused this, and I had no regrets. From that day forward, my life changed entirely. Nothing but success has followed me since. Darren's position needed to be filled temporarily while management searched for a permanent replacement. They interviewed a few of us, including me. Lucky for me, the other two candidates both fell mysteriously ill on the morning of their interviews. Unfortunate timing, really. With no one else available, I was the obvious choice. I performed so well in the role they scrapped the search for a permanent hire and gave the job to me. I was finally earning enough to escape that dump of an apartment. I bought a house, a new car, a fresh wardrobe, and for the first time in years, I had money left over. I even adopted a kitten. His name's Max. As for heartbreak, that's not a problem either. Anyone who crosses me, well, let's just say they end up regretting it deeply. No matter who you are, if you try to stop my progress or threaten my success, you'll end up like Darren. You may not believe me, but that's okay. The devil didn't need my belief either. He just left me a little gift, his cookbook. Funny, really. I started my career wanting to be a pilot. I ended it as a chef.